His immediate successor, Theresa May, was also a Remainer, and she struggled quite a bit to come up with an EU exit strategy that would be acceptable to everyone. But then she resigned too, and Britain now finally has an unambiguously pro-Brexit Prime Minister named Boris Johnson. And his rise to power represents the completion of the slow takeover of the Conservative Party by its anti-EU faction, and the beginning of this present era of British politics in which absolutely everything revolves around the Brexit question. So who is Boris Johnson? Well, he is quite the character. Born in America, he worked as a wacky conservative political commentator for many years. I actually remember visiting Britain in the early 2000s and always seeing the same mop-top blonde guy on all of the chat shows. People liked him because he was witty and goofy in a way you don't expect a conservative to be. He was somebody who played very well in Britain's very celebrity-focused media culture, which tends to really like these sorts of flamboyant, eccentric characters. Anyway, Boris eventually went into politics and was elected Mayor of London, and it was from that post that he threw his weight behind the Leave forces in the 2016 Brexit referendum. Now, I think that if you are not British, it is very easy to regard Boris Johnson as this very quirky and even charming British stereotype. This kind of stuttering, rumpled oaf who makes these wry and witty jokes all the time.
How much is the price of value bread?
Value bread?
Yes.
Well, it depends, you know.
No, come on. Nowhere to go.
50p, 49p.
Have you been gelling up on your value bread? That's what Dave couldn't answer this morning.
Right?
The PM couldn't say.
Oh, right. Well, anyway, I'm not. You mustn't. I mean,
do you buy value bread?
I can tell you the price of a bottle of champagne. How about that? Is that the kind of thing you want me to say?
But in Britain itself, Boris is this very polarizing character who a lot of people do not find charming at all. Particularly among British left-wingers, he plays into this completely different stereotype of like a very entitled, overly ambitious, basically untalented, famous for being famous, D-rate pseudo-celebrity. There is also the so-called character question, which is the euphemistic way that the Brits refer to the fact that Boris Johnson seems to have a fairly chaotic personal life. According to the Daily Mail, he has embarked on at least 5 extramarital flings and got at least 2 of his mistresses pregnant. Now, by his own admission, the main purpose of Johnson's prime ministership is to just get Brexit done. It has been bound up in bureaucratic process hell in both London and Europe for close to 4 years now. Johnson is hoping to win a strong conservative majority in the parliament so that he can finally get some sort of Brexit deal passed. Okay, so that is one side of the British political spectrum. And then on the other side, we have the Labour Party, led by Jeremy Corbyn. Now, the British Labour Party was founded to be a socialist party, but there has been a lot of debate in recent decades over just how left-wing it should be. Very similar to the debate that the US Democrats are having right now. The last elected Labour Party government, under former Prime Minister Tony Blair, was very successful, but also very centrist. But that provoked a backlash from the further left faction of the party, and in 2015, that backlash finally reached its pinnacle when Jeremy Corbyn was elected head of Labour. Corbyn is 70 years old and has basically been a politician for his entire adult life. He was first elected to Parliament in 1983 and is now on his 9th term. In Parliament, Corbyn was known for being on the furthest, most extreme left faction of the Labour Party. He was widely disliked by the Tony Blair faction and was never given any job or responsibility in that government. And Corbyn returned the favor by famously voting against the Blair administration more than 500 times. Now, clearly, there are a lot of people who like Corbyn. He is a man who has been very consistent in his principles for over 40 years now, even when they have not been popular. Among young people in particular, who have become a lot more interested in doctrinaire socialism as of late, he is seen as this very heroic figure, someone who has triumphed over the corrupt centrist establishment, much like another politician we could name. But the degree that Corbyn has tacked so consistently to the far left over the last 40 years has obviously opened him up to a lot of criticism as well. The one thing that seems to be really sticking to him in particular is the degree that he has been so quick to make common cause with Britain's enemies on the grounds that anybody who hates British foreign policy as much as he does can't be all bad. So over the years, he's been accused of sucking up to Russia, Iran, Syria, Cuba, Venezuela, basically anyone who has made a big show of opposing the supposedly imperialistic foreign policies of the Western world. His extremely strong support for the Palestinians in particular has opened him up to a lot of criticism that he has crossed the line into outright anti-Semitism. But anyway, the question you're all asking is, what does any of this have to do with Brexit? And that's a good question, and it gets into another very common criticism of Corbyn, which is that he is sort of miscast for this particular moment of British history. See, historically, Corbyn has been quite skeptical of the EU. He's seen its whole open borders, open markets agenda as one more manifestation of the sinister capitalist order that the Western powers are seeking to impose on the wider world. But over time, the more moderate faction of the British left has learned to make peace with globalism. Anti-globalism, by contrast, is now very much associated with a kind of right-wing xenophobia and nationalism, which is what most British left-wingers see as powering the whole Brexit movement. So anyway, Corbyn's current position on Brexit is just that there should be a second referendum, this time putting a tangible Brexit deal with the Europeans, which Corbyn will negotiate, up against a proposition to just drop the Brexit idea altogether and remain. But you really get the impression that this is not remotely Corbyn's first priority, that he would much rather fight an election over his plan to pump more money into the public healthcare system, or build more public housing, or fight climate change, or things like that. Okay, so that is basically the British two-party system, but the country has a lot of other smaller political parties as well. In third place at the moment is the Scottish National Party. This is the party that supports Scotland leaving the United Kingdom and becoming its own country. The SNP was never all that successful in British national politics for obvious reasons, but once Scotland was given its own parliament in the 1990s, it became quite successful at the regional level, and that regional success in turn helped them become more popular at the national level. In the last two elections, the SNP has risen dramatically to become a major player in British national politics. They won a big majority of Scotland's seats in the British Parliament, as you can see here. Scottish nationalism is generally seen as a very left-wing movement, much like French-Canadian nationalism in my country. The SNP is very pro-EU as well, as Scotland had the highest Remain vote in the 2016 referendum. The current head of the Scottish National Party is Nicola Sturgeon, who is also the Prime Minister of Scotland. In the British system, you're apparently allowed to be a regional and national politician at the same time. She is basically a career politician who does not seem like a terribly interesting woman. British viewers, please let me know if I'm wrong. Now, the SNP does not run candidates outside of Scotland, so there's no chance that they could ever win a British election. So what are they trying to do? Well, I will let Nicola speak for herself.
SNP MPs will work with other parties to try to stop the UK from being taken out of the European Union. And if there is a hung parliament after this election, an outcome that could give Scotland the balance of power, SNP MPs would seek to form a progressive alliance to lock the Tories out of government.
The other thing she really wants is for the British government to support Scotland holding another referendum on independence from the UK. They already had one of these in 2014, but the SNP believes they should keep having them until they get the right answer. And speaking of the oppressive burdens of nationalism, before we get to the final parties, let's just take a break and talk about today's video sponsor, ExpressVPN. This is a very cool app that lets you enjoy everything the internet has to offer, regardless of what country you live in. So, as I am sure you know, when your computer is connected to the internet, it is linked to a specific IP or internet protocol that lets websites know certain stuff about you, particularly where in the world you're located. And it is by reading your IP that the internet is able to deny you access to certain things on the basis of your nationality. So for example, Saturday Night Live is a show that is famous for its political satire and its sketches often make big news. But because SNL's content is restricted in Canada for some reason, whenever I go to click on an embedded clip in a blog or whatever, I get this. Luckily, there is ExpressVPN to the rescue. What the ExpressVPN app does is connect you to a virtual IP that essentially fools the internet into thinking you're somewhere where you're not.